Greetings to you all, friends, in the name of our Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Again, it's a joy for me to fellowship and to gather with you this evening to fellowship in this or during this camp meeting. Of course, our last meeting and our last message was on Wednesday evening, and we looked at the chapters from 22 through to 27, looking at the end time from the prophecies, and also just the life of Joseph of Arimathea as an example of how to live in the end time. Of course, there was a lot of background that needed to be shared on that day, so I understand that it might have been a bit dense for some of us, as we were sharing quite a bit of background information, but that was so that we can get to the meat of that whole pericope or of that whole passage. Now, I flew through chapter 25, and today I want to take some time just to dig into chapter 25 of the book of Matthew, more specifically or more especially the story of the talents, or the parable of the talents. So that I'd like us to dig into that, the parable of the talents. Of course, as we mentioned on Wednesday, the parable of the talents takes place during this discourse, or during what we'll call Jesus' sermon about the end time, right? This is Jesus' sermon about the end time. So of course, he starts by foretelling the destruction of Jerusalem, then the coming woes or the coming troubles for his believers. And then, of course, in the middle of all of that, he talks about, or he sends out a warning message to his believers with regards to their preparation for the end time, when he shares the parable of the 10 virgins, and then this story that we're going to share tonight, which is the parable of the talents. And then, of course, he moves into this judgment scene in chapter 25, towards the end of chapter 25, where he then talks about what many others call the exam questions before the judgment. So these are the questions that will be asked at the judgment. And so in order for you to pass the exam, you need to fill your life with the content that will enable you to provide the answers to those questions. And what are those questions? Where were you when I was hungry? Where were you when I was sick? Where were you when I was in prison? So did you feed and clothe me when I was hungry? Did you visit me when I was in prison? Did you visit me when I was sick? Of course, that's part of what we touched on Wednesday. And so these three things, or rather these stories, are part of one narrative, or one big sermon that Christ is sharing with his followers. And of course, this is just before Christ is crucified. So this is very important for Christ to do, because he feels that he needs to accomplish this, or he needs to communicate this before he is crucified. It's very important for Matthew also to position it where he has positioned these, to say that even when Christ was faced with death, he felt it was important to share these warnings and to share these messages with his followers. And again, I repeat, the message and the story, or the parable of the of the talents, forms part of these messages that Christ were important to share with his followers before he was crucified, right? And so what was so important about these talents, and what can we glean from this, and what does this have to do with us, and what does this say to us as we live in the end time? And one of the questions that I want to answer, and which we tried to do on Wednesday, but I want to come back again and emphasize on, is this idea and this question and this notion that when we are faced with the end time, people tend to make one of two decisions, or both, right? They make these decisions, the following decisions, as soon as they realize that the time of the end is near, or the end is near. They do these things. One, they exclude themselves, or they remove themselves from general society, or from participation in general society. They disengage from the issues of society. They posit and position themselves as people who are concerned about more holier things than the normal day-to-day things of life. So they don't care about people who are hungry. We don't care about politicians who are abusing people and stealing money. We don't really concern ourselves with all those things. We are more focused on noble and holy and higher things. That's what the first thing that people do, is that they disengage, we distance ourselves from society. Right when the world needs us, it is when we want to distance ourselves from the world. The second one, and the second thing that we tend to do, is that we then tend to give ourselves off to mediocrity. We tend to give ourselves off to mendacity, to mediocrity, to doing the bare minimum. And people divorce themselves from dreaming, from striving for excellence, from doing things and doing them well. I see here at PE, Uitenhage District Camp Meeting, you guys are far from mediocre because of how you have gone about with your AV and broadcasting initiatives to ensure that people get the not just they don't get the messages, but it is also broadcast in an excellent manner. And so what people tend to do is that when they're faced with the end time, people tend to then say, no, what's the point of school? What's the point of working? What's the point of making money? What's the point of feeding the poor? What's the point of, becoming engaged and involved in the world and in human affairs? Of course, this is almost like a contradiction, a contravention of Luke chapter 2, verse 52, which talks about how Christ, when he grew, Christ's maturity and Christ's development is that he grew in stature, in favor with God and with man. The ideal Christian in the end time is one who is in favor with God and with man. Your favor with God does not make you an enemy of man. If anything, your favor and your connection with God ought to make you useful to your fellow man, right? So not only do we have this example from Jesus of how to be and how to live in the end time, i.e., that your connection with God should result in your connection and your usefulness to your fellow man. But it doesn't just end there. In fact, I'd even go as far as to say that your connection with God is revealed and reflected to how you treat your fellow man. Your spiritual individual connection is not something that is a private entity or private enterprise. It has an impact, or it has implications for how you relate with others and in society. So it's not just something that you hold on to in isolation and as a private enterprise. It is tested, and it also matures when it is experienced in community, right? Someone once shared this illustration, once shared this point, that God is an ambiguous statement, and intentionally so, that God exists in community. God only exists in community. And the ambiguity of that statement is to say that God's existence is community. God's very existence is community. But also the other part of that statement, which is intentional, is to say that to experience and the full experience and expression of God is in community. So not only is God a let us create, a God who exists in community, but he is also a God who can only be experienced in community and not in isolation. Yes, you may get a revelation of God in isolation, but you will never get an experience of God in isolation. That experience requires community. That is why even when John receives a revelation of God, he ensures to impart the revelation because it finds full expression in the 7 churches in community, right? And so we need to desist, and we need to watch ourselves that we do not make these otherwise self-defeating and spiritually mutilating, self-mutilation of one, divorcing ourselves from human affairs, but also number 2, of handing over and committing ourselves to mediocrity. And why is that? And this is one of the biggest and greatest possessions and beliefs of the Adventist Church. It's this beautiful teaching of stewardship, that stewardship is not just about how to live your life currently in preparation for the second coming, but stewardship is filling your life content so that you can respond to the exam questions on the judgment day. So what are we doing when we are living a life of good stewardship? We are actually filling our lives with answers so that we will not be found wanting. When Jesus asked this question, what did you do with what I gave you? What did you do with the responsibility and the duty I gave to look after your fellow man, but also to look after and multiply what I gave you? And so in chapter 25, Jesus starts this parable of the talents, and he says, for the kingdom of heaven is like a man going on a journey, who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Let me pause there for a moment. It's very important for us to look at that, each according to his ability, all right? And of course, as the story goes on, it says he went on a journey. The man who had received 5 talents went once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with 2 talents gained 2 more, but the man who had received the 1 talent went off, dug a hole in the ground, and hid the master's money. After a long time, the master of the servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5. See, I've gained 5 more. The man also who was given 2 talents went and came back and gave the master 2 more talents. And he said, Master, see, you entrusted with 2 talents, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. When you look at the first guy who brought back 10 talents, my mic seems to be slipping off here. So the first gentleman who was given 10 talents, right, 5 talents, comes back with 10 more. And then the gentleman who was given 2 talents comes back with 2 more talents, and so he gives his master 4 more talents, right? Now, the beauty of the story is the master's response. He says, to both of them, to the one who returns 10, the response and the reward is the same. I don't know if you noticed that. So the one who brings back 10, the response is the same. Well done, you could been faithful with little, I will put you ruler over much. The second servant who has been given also 2 talents, and he returns with 4, the response is the same. So whether you return 10 or 4, it is the same to the master. He celebrates it equally. For with the master, it is not about quality, or it is not about quantity, the quantity of what you return, but it is about the effort in producing what you return. So the master is not rewarding them for what they're giving back to him. He is rewarding them for their diligence in handling what he gave to them. I hope you're hearing that. So they're not being rewarded for how much they give back to the master. The master is not in the business of extracting the maximum out of us. He is in the business of expecting maximum effort from us. Whether that effort produces 10 or 4, it does not matter to the master. What the master wants to see is you engaged in a process of improvement, of development, of growth, of progress, and of multiplying what he gave you. And so the problem with us, right? The problem with us, and I want to just go back and backtrack for a moment at the beginning of the story. The problem with us is that the first thing we do is that we fail to recognize that what is given to each servant is not given to them as a reward, or rather, it's not given to them as a reward of who they are. But the master tests and sees their ability to handle the responsibility of what they're about to be given. And so what they're given is in recognition of their inherent ability to handle what the master wants to hand over to them. How does this look like in our lives? How does this look like in our lives? Now, I'm going to share this with you very carefully. I've got a nephew, right? I've got a couple of nephews, actually, so none of them will know who I'm talking about. And then my nephew, I had a conversation with him once, and I said to him, what are you going to do with your life, right? What are you going to do with your life? What are you planning to do with your life? So I asked my nephew, and I said to him, so what are you going to do with your life? What are you planning to do with your life? Where are you going? What's your plan for your 5-year plan? I asked him this question. He was 18 at the time. And he says to me, no, I don't want to go to college. I don't want to go to university. I don't want to go to study further. He says, I want to go and make money. And I said, okay, what's the plan? How are you going to make this money? And of course, then he tells me he's into this cryptocurrency thing, and he's going to try and get into the arts and perform a rap and whatever. So I said to him, but how will this happen? He says, no, school is not necessary. You don't need university. People are making money without university. So Mizi doesn't have matric and he's a millionaire. Caspar Nyovest doesn't have matric and he's a millionaire. Bill Gates dropped out of university and he's not a millionaire, and he's a millionaire, right? So I stopped there at that moment, because what he was saying to me is that you've got a degree, but you're not as rich as these guys, and these guys are quite rich and they don't have degrees. So I took it personally. So I said to him, okay, no, I mean, you make a good case, right? You make a very good case. And so I said, but did you know that Somizi's parents, right, before they died, do you know what they did before they died? And he didn't know. I said, no, Somizi's parents are actually entertainment royalty, right? So they'd made their names in royalty. So it makes sense that Somizi would grow up and make it in that environment because, one, his parents are part of that royal ensemble, and then they're part of that royal, exclusive club within that entertainment industry. And I said to him, so what are your parents captains of? What are they? What industries have they dominated? What networks have they created for you to make it in whatever space you want to get into? What says your father, like a head honcho of cryptocurrencies? Is that your shoe in? Is that your network? What is it? Of course, it sounded a bit more personal when I asked him those questions. And of course, I said to him, can you rap for me right now and dance for me right now? Just dance and rap for me right now. And of course, he was shy and started scratching his head. Said, but you can't perform for me, and I'm a single individual here, and you're expecting to fill up domes like Casper Nyoves, but you're still shy to perform for one person. What was I doing with my nephew? What was I trying to teach him? Is that not before you dream about something, before you want to make it in a certain space and a certain place, you have to check the resources at your disposal. As you compare yourself with other people, you need to understand, do you have the same resources? Do you have the same abilities that they do in order to make it? In you trying to compare yourself to other people, are you not neglecting what you are specifically gifted in and what God has resourced you to succeed in? Some of our failures are not because we're not gifted, they're not because we are not talented. Some of our failures are because we keep knocking and dancing on the wrong stages. We keep acquiring and we keep wanting to participate in arenas that were not appointed for us, that we have no ability in succeeding in. There's that need for us to be honest with ourselves in terms of assessing our own God-given abilities. So you're not frustrated because you're a failure. You're frustrated because you're not maximizing on the talents and the gifts that God has given you. You're not walking the path that God has set for you to succeed in, right? And so that's why we tend to fail. But even more importantly, and this is the point that I wanna drive home, right? It is that each according to their abilities, right? So, can you imagine? I always imagine myself that what the story is that some of us grow up in one-room houses in the township or even in the squatter camps with barely enough to eat, and somehow there's an expectation for us to succeed and to make it, right? There's an expectation for us to outgrow and to escape the limitations of our environments. Okay, and so but when we do that, right, when we have to get out of that one bedroom house where our parents are struggling to make ends meet, or our single parents are struggling to make ends meet, it is anti-Christian, anti-biblical, right, to try and outgrow and escape your poverty by comparing yourself to someone who does not come from the same environment as you, right? For example, if you want to escape a squatter camp, Bill Gates cannot be your inspiration because Bill Gates did not grow up in a squatter camp. Bill Gates grew up with a trust fund with parents who were raking in millions of dollars a year. Bill Gates, when we talk about him not going to university, didn't drop out because he wasn't smart. He dropped out because he had already perfected what the university would have taught him, right? Bill Gates didn't just drop out of any university. He dropped out of Harvard University. You know how much Harvard University costs? That means that his parents had enough to afford to send him to Harvard, and there was enough for him to feel comfortable dropping out without feeling like he's wasted his parents' money, right? So that's the kind of life that Bill Gates comes from. You, Spelele, from Emakaki or from Enjoli, cannot compare yourself, right, to Bill Gates because you don't have the same resources. And that is true. And also what is even more beautiful is the fact that God has not placed you on this earth to outdo Bill Gates. All he wants you to do is to take the two that he has given you and to multiply it. As to what that looks like is between you and God. It cannot be between you, Bill Gates, and God. Bill Gates has been given 5, and if he multiplies that to be 10, that's between him and God. It is not for you to try try and outdo Bill Gates. Now, what am I talking about here, and what am I saying here? It is that each according to their abilities, you are given each according to your ability to not only utilize, to not only guarantee your success in whatever situation you find yourself in, but it is also given to you so that whatever environment that God has placed you in is not destructive to you. Some of us, if we had grown up with the opulence and the wealth of Bill Gates, we would not have been so intentional about our success and about our growth. We would have probably rested on our laurels and tried to claim what is our parents' wealth and use that, right? So some of us would have said, what's the need to study further? What's the need to make a success for my life? What's the point of me dreaming about becoming a better person? Because we've already made it, we're already wealthy as it is, right? And so some environments, though glamorous they may seem, can actually be destructive to our intention and to our ability to grow and our ability to dream of greater and better things for us. Now, of course, this is not to say that God places us in poverty intentionally to try and get the best out of us, but God uses those situations and those environments, and even in those poor and poorest environments, God is able to gift us with enough to make it out of them, to produce good out of those situations. That is why when you stand before God with your 8 and with your 4, someone else with their 2, and someone else with their 1 from 0, when we stand before God, the response is all the same. Well done, you good and faithful servant. Why? Because God is not interested in the quantity of what you have produced. The people who obsess about quantity, are us who are obsessed with this consumerist, materialist culture that we find ourselves in. God is not obsessed with that, because if it was all about quantity, then all the politicians who have stolen money from state coffers and have lots of money, they have multiplied their wealth. Hallelujah. But the means that they've done it has come at the cost of some people's lives. It has come at the cost of the convenience of other people. So God is not interested in quantity, because quantity can also be can also be achieved through corruption. But effort, the desire to outperform, to outdo, to outgrow yourself is something that you cannot fake. It is something that you cannot pretend to be doing. It is something that requires consistency, the ability to examine your life on a daily basis, to wake up the next morning determined and intentional about outdoing and about being better than who you are and who you were the previous day, right? And so while some of us cowered away during the pandemic and the lockdown, waiting for the world to come, there were those who opened their computers and their laptops and started initiatives that are now today have grown into global movements. They started to teach themselves new skills that they had no time to learn when they were busy with life and life was going on as normal. And I want to ask you this question, right? I want to ask you this question as a child of God living in the end time. When the lockdown occurred, when God gave you the opportunity to multiply what He has given you, what did you do with that whole 18 months? What did you do with your life during that time? And did you know that this time that you have dismissed as a time of disaster, as a time of pain, and as a time of inconvenience has actually been dedicated and has been appointed by heaven as a time for you to experience growth, to spend time multiplying what God has given you and has gifted you? And the question will be asked of you in 2020 through to 2021. What did you do when I shut the world down and afforded you the opportunity to teach yourself some new skills, to teach yourself some new abilities, to multiply and to grow your talent? What did you do with that time? That is stewardship that we ask ourselves in the end time. We do not look as a people of the end time. We do not look at the impending danger and disaster and stop there. We look at disaster in as far as we will be required to assist those who are impacted by that disaster. We look at calamity not as a threat to our own well-being, but in as far as we will be required to jump in and assist those who may be negatively and adversely impacted by that. And then we also look at disaster disaster as an opportunity to say, what can we do to bring? What can we do to deliver? What can we do to improve the lives of people? Yes, even in this end time. Am I a vessel that is sharp enough to be sharper than a double-edged sword that God can throw into the darkness that is in the world, and that will make an impact, that will make a meaningful contribution, right? But are we just obsessed with this idea of being exceptional? There's nothing that makes me laugh more than Adventism and Adventists when they believe that just by invoking the name Adventist, they are more excellent than everyone else. There's this belief and this exceptionalism that you will be excellent by osmosis without putting in any effort. And that is why the world is outgrowing the church in terms of intelligence. It is outgrowing the church in terms of innovation. We are still pitching tents when the world is meeting through their cell phones. We are still doing door-to-door pamphlet distributions when the world has even gone past emailing lesson studies. There's TikTok, there are Reels, there's Instagram, there is Twitter. People are able to send messages in less than 128 characters. The world has gotten to a point where it requires summaries and bite-sized information. We have not even achieved the ability to compact our messaging in a manner that will be palatable and that will be edible to the society that we live in. The world is moving at a faster pace, and we are still stuck in rural America in the 1800s, and God will call us to account for that. I gave you the resources to buy the equipment. I gave you the resources and I exposed you to the innovation. What did you do with it? And as I sit here right now, I'm so glad that I'm being beamed in people's homes, in whose homes I will never be invited to. That's technology. That is literally the three angels' message taking wings and taking flight, and flying across the globe. At the same time as I'm sitting here in Kabeja, the message is being preached to all the world. But we still believe as a church that there will be time when we need to close down these platforms and return to our petrified and mortified ways of worshiping this one location, because we are so obsessed with doing things the old way, that old-time religion, the traditional way of doing things. Somehow we have imbued that, and we have placed upon that some sense of holiness and righteousness. Let me tell you that is akin to taking what God has given you and burying it and hoping that you will present it to God as it was when He gave it to you. The staying still and not growing is not righteousness. It is not holiness. It is simply mediocrity, and heaven is allergic to mediocrity. And so, each according to their ability, And I said again that you're not expected to outrun, outcompete, and outperform anyone else. All you're expected to do is to do better than what God has given you. You know, I went into Avis the other time, and I was hiring a car, and this gentleman came out of Avis, and he had a sheet of paper, and of course on this paper he had the car drawn out, and he was looking for the dents and the mark on the car. So he went around the car, he was looking for the dents on the car, so that I will return the car as it is, so that when I return the car and they do their inspection, there are no additional dents, there are no additional marks on the car. If there were any, then I would have to pay for those, right? So they mark the dents that are theirs. So they mark the dents that they with which they gave me the car, right? And so it says, okay, so these are the dents. And so I see a mark, right, right next to the front bumper, right? And I said to him, what would happen? I asked him this question. I said, what would happen if I took that mark and if I took the car to the panel beater and they did a sterling job at erasing that mark, right? What would happen, right? And he kept quiet and he smiled, right? He didn't know how to answer me. Then I said, what would happen if I had another mark right next to the car? He was very quick to answer the question. He says, oh, but you'll have to pay for it, sir. We'll have to charge you, and you'll have to pay. And so, and I returned to my original question. I said, what would happen if I fix the dent that is there? And he laughed, says, sir, we don't have a policy. That'll just be at your own expense. You see, Avis has a policy that manages mediocrity. Avis doesn't have a policy that manages improvement. When Avis looks at you, they don't see you as a possibility and a potential for growth and improvement and multiplying what they gave you. When Avis looks at you, they look at you as a risk. They look at you as a threat to the well-being of their possessions. But man, when God looks at us, you see, God doesn't have a policy to manage, unlike Avis. Avis has a policy to manage mediocrity. But God doesn't have a policy to manage mediocrity. He only has a policy for excellence, right? The excellent, well done, you good and faithful servant. Come and enter into the joy of your Lord. You have been faithful in little, I will place you ruler over much. Come and enter into the joy of your Lord. So not all, so that's a policy, that's a fully fledged policy to manage excellence. God, when God looks at you, unlike Avis, he doesn't see you as a potential for destruction and a potential for danger and a threat to the possession he has given you. He sees in you the potential to multiply what he has given you. That is why he gives it to you. He sees you and he looks at you, he weighs you, and he says, this one has the ability to do much more, to make a dent in the kingdom of darkness. This one has the ability to multiply what I've given them. This one has the ability to improve on what I've given them in spite of their location, in spite of where they are growing up. Now, the problem is, instead of returning that faith, instead of returning the trust that God has placed in us, we go out of our way to ensure that we disappoint God. We go out of our way to ensure that we are the exact opposite of what he knows us to be, and that is the possibility and potential to multiply what he has given us. Man, and did I mention, how many times have I mentioned this, that this text occurs in the judgment narrative right in the end time? It is important for us to even know and understand this. Jesus felt it was important for him to share this with us right before he was crucified. It is important for us to know this because it forms part of the passages that we should be reading in the end time. Mediocrity has no place in heaven. Mendacity has no place in the kingdom of God. It is only excellence and only excellence that has a place in the kingdom of God. And God does not expect you to outperform and to compete with your fellow believers. He's not expecting you to compete with anyone else. He's expecting you to be excellent. Yes, even in this end time, when it seems as though growth is futile, when it seems as though progress is futile, God expects of you to do better with what he has given you. And of course, I know there are old people in this call as well, and there are older people on this call. I read something very interesting the other day about the human mind. And they said that the human mind, we've always believed that the human mind ages as we age, that it stops functioning optimally as we age. But new research coming out is showing that the human mind, the human brain doesn't age. It simply conserves energy, right? So what this means is the moment you stop using your brain, it also then shuts down the functions that you stop utilizing. But if you start new functions and you start doing new things, then your brain creates new ways that learn and store the ability to do the new things that you are doing. That is why 60-year-olds, 70-year-olds who grew up when there were no cars around them, and when cars were not as plentiful as they are now, are able to learn how to drive and drive safely. That is why 80-year-olds are able to operate smartphones, even though they grew up even before the time of telephones and ringer phones, right? Have you ever thought about that? How you have moved through technologies, and each time a new technology has come out, you have been able to learn and to perfect it and to use it adequately. What is that telling you? That your mind is so powerful that it is able to learn new things, but also your mind is so adaptable that it is able to forget what you're no longer using it for. So we don't lose the ability to count. We don't lose the ability to do mathematics because we are old. We lose the ability to do mathematics because we stopped doing mathematics. My grandmother used to do this all the time. That when we are in the house, and in order to save electricity, she said, in all the rooms where nobody is in, you switch off the electricity and you only keep the lights on in the room where everyone is seated. So if you're not in a particular room, there's no need for you to keep the lights on because there's nobody requiring light in those rooms. That's exactly what your brain does. Where the room, where the function is no longer required, the brain switches off the lights and it focuses all the energy in the room where you are utilizing and where you are functioning. And if your function is to wake up every morning, drink tea, and sit on your porch, your brain will only store that functionality and switch off all the other abilities, switch off all the other areas and all the other centers. So there's never an excuse. Age is not even an excuse for mediocrity. You can't even say, I'm too old to do this, I'm too old to learn this, because God has created you in such a fearful and wonderful way to ensure that you are always able to produce and to deliver whatever responsibility and duty He hands over to you. You are not mediocre and you're not failing because God has not given you enough to give to enable you to succeed. You are failing simply because you're not returning the trust that God has placed on you to say, man, this one is able, each according to their abilities. This one is able, this one can. And so we need to stop this idea of comparing ourselves to others. I can talk for the whole night here, but I only believe in the everlasting gospel. I don't believe in everlasting sermons, but I believe in the everlasting gospel. So I'm gonna make sure that the sermon is not everlasting. And so I've always been fascinated by how we as a church like to compare ourselves to other churches as if our mission was to outperform other churches. That's not the mission of the church. The mission of the church is to diligently, faithfully, excellently execute the duties and the responsibilities that God has given us. Whether others do it and what others are doing, that's none of our business. Our business is to do what we have been given to do and to do it excellently. Oh, and as the world draws to an end, as the world, as Earth's history draws to a conclusion, there's a requirement for us. There's a requirement for us to be excellent in what we do. And of course, Jesus says when He asked this man who took this talent, and I hope this is not a prophecy, this is not a prediction on the remnant church. He says to this man, this man says, Master, you gave me one talent, I took it and I buried it, and here it is, I return it to you as it is. I always look at how we argue around issues on the Bible. We'll always go back and say, our pioneers read the Bible like this. Our pioneers had this interpretation. Our pioneers did things like this. The structure of the church has been with us all this time. We glory in how we have done this. We have done things. How long we have done things. And we always bring this up as if it is a compliment and a testament of our ability to not change, not realizing that this is an indictment, that what we are actually confessing is we have taken what we have inherited and all we have done is bury it and just ensure that we keep managing it so that it does not change, it does not look different to what it was when we were given it. When I look at this parable and these three gentlemen that God gives, that the master gives these talents to, I do not see the Adventist church in the first two men. I see the Adventist church in the third servant. We are the church that buries what God has given us. We want to preserve what God has given us, to keep it as it is. We think that righteousness lies in preservation. When God looks at that, He doesn't see righteousness. He doesn't see loyalty. All He sees is mediocrity. And man, the judgment for that is so severe that it would have been better had you gone and robbed a bank. It would have been better had you committed a murder than to be thrown outside the city where there's weeping and gnashing of teeth along with the rapist murderers, because God hates mediocrity to the level that He has placed it at the same level as murderers, as thieves, and as rapists. And so there is no heaven for mediocrity. Heaven, even when it is explained in the Bible, is a place of excellence. It is a place full of wonder and glory. And if you do not possess the aptitude to handle excellence, you will struggle with the more marvelous excellence of heaven. And so even as we practice the stewardship of multiplying, of being excellent in discharging the duties that God has given us, we are actually rehearsing for our permanent residence, not in heaven, but back here on earth, which will be recreated in the excellent image of God. And of course, you bear that very same image of excellence. Why are you betraying it with all this mediocrity? Why are you betraying it with all this laziness? Why are you betraying it with all this procrastination? Why are you betraying it with this imposter syndrome? Why are you betraying this excellence that is in this image that God has allowed you to put on? Why are you betraying this? Why are you betraying what you are? The essence of who you are is excellence. You are forged in the bowels of excellence. You are conceived in the mind of excellence. That is why even the psalmist says, "For you have made man just a little lower than the angels." You are wonder itself. Why then do you choose to extricate yourself from this wonderment and from this excellence and baptize yourself willingly in this mediocrity? Is it not time to stop doubting the talents, the gifts that God has given you? Is it not time to stop feeling like an imposter, stop feeling like you are pretending? Perhaps you wouldn't have gotten as far as you will have if you were fooling all people and people about your excellence. If you believe that people will catch you out that you are pretending. I'm talking to those who have imposter syndrome. If you believe that people will catch you out that you are pretending, imagine how excellent you must be to fool people to the point where they have not caught you out even until this time. So it's either you are excellent at fooling people, or you are excellent but you won't believe that you are excellent. Either way, you are excellent, and it's time for you to embrace it and to live it. Stop doubting yourself. God has not created and has not given you a spirit of fear. Go forth, pursuing, chasing what lies before you. Whatever it is that your hand finds to do it to the glory of God, especially in these end times. People need evidence of growth. People need evidence of excellence. People need something new, something different, something other than what we keep seeing in our TV screens. We are tired of hearing about government websites that are not working and then are not getting hacked. We are tired of hearing people about government employees who are not at their phones. We don't need that anymore. We need people who will go the extra mile for one another. We need people who will create solutions to the problems that the world is facing. And when the world asks, why are you still able to create such marvelous things? Why are you able to create such amazing things? And you tell them, because I don't have to spare. I don't have much to spare. I don't need to spare all of this. I don't need to spare myself, because home is soon. Home is around the corner. So we are excellent. We pursue excellence. We are diligent in executing the duties of God. We spare no expenses when it comes to doing the work of God. We spare no resources when it comes to learning new ways of doing the work of God. Why? Because God is coming very soon, and he will ask us, what is it that we did with the talents and the gifts that he gave us? I pray and hope that we will reflect and more the two men that multiplied what they were given, and we will not be found as the third group, as part of the third group, or the third man, or the third servant, who only buried and was caught up and obsessed with this idea of multiplying and duplicating and redoing what has been done over and over again. It is time for us to multiply and to grow, yes, even in the end time. May the Lord add blessing to the reading of his word. Amen.